I Will Stand By You by Poképasta Music. Not long ago, I started playing Pokémon against one of my friends who was also hooked on the series. He had been playing White 2 for a while longer than I had been playing Black, and was more experienced. We held weekly battles every Friday to see which one of us was better, which of course meant I was grinding at Black Tower constantly, and didn't have much time to do other things. After a couple of months of doing this, another of our friends grew interested and wanted to battle us. I welcomed the idea and loaned him my original White so he could start playing. The very next day he challenged me and my other friend to a battle. We thought it was funny considering our teams were in the high 80s after months of grinding. We were shocked when the battle got underway and he already had level 60s with some pretty wicked movesets. We obviously beat him, but I was still puzzled how he got strong so fast, considering he only had a bare amount of badges. To have level 60 Pokemon, I was naturally curious. The next day in a class we shared, I questioned him over how he did it. My first suspicion was the use of an action replay, but he said he didn't own one. After a long pause, and making me promise not to tell our friend, he told me his secret. He told me about some Pokemon creator called Pokegen. You could create any Pokemon at any level. Not only that, you could choose its stats to make them the highest possible. On the side, there were options of changing moves, and if you wanted them shiny. I was first appalled that he cheated to compete with us, but after the look on our friend's face in battle the next day, I found it hilarious. I got the program myself and began to tinker with it. Having all my badges, I knew I could make any level I wanted. My first few teams were pretty bad, but with practice, I got better. I paid attention to natures and abilities to even further boost my Pokemon's power. My first complete team consisted of the most powerful and my favorites from different types. I had a Rhyperior, a Scyther, a Haxorus, an Aerodactyl, an Arbok, and a Charizard, all shiny. I went into battle against my friends the next week and completely destroyed my friend who still leveled legitimately. I actually beat my friend who introduced me to the program quite a few times. The thing is, he had wireless at his house, so he could new Pokemon anytime he wanted. I didn't, so I had to get a new team anytime I could. He eventually found out my team's weakness, and they were defeated with ease. So I began to create new Pokemon here and there to even up the odds. Of course, over the next few weeks I became addicted to the program. I grew power hungry with it, and only used Pokemon created through the program. My team changed every now and then to better serve whatever I was up against. The only member who stayed consistent was my Charizard, who was my favorite Pokemon. Even though he wasn't the strongest in my team, he always had a bizarre knack for winning me in possible battles. I moved him into my PC eventually when he kept getting beaten by my friend's Cryogonal with a Never Melt Ice to reduce the damage of his powerful flamethrower. I made a new Charizard with a higher special attack, but I didn't feel right using it. It was a Charizard, not my Charizard. After 2 days of using the new one, I got rid of it for my old Charizard again. All the other had going for it was higher speed and slightly higher attack power. I knew I didn't need it since I had an Aerodactyl with an unbelievable speed of 358, not to mention my Dragonite, who is pretty much all special. I battled with my new team for the next few weeks until one day I was confronted by my friend who didn't use the program. He wasn't too happy to hear what I and my other friend were doing. I was expecting he'd be mad over the fact that we were cheating, but his point was completely different. He was upset over what I was doing because I was apparently playing God. Creating Pokemon on will, neglecting those I used in the process. He left and I was confused. I shrugged it off and left as I knew him to take his games way too seriously. I went home that night and that's when things began to get strange for me. That night I had a bizarre nightmare in which I was locked in a rusted old cell. The cell itself stood alone in the midst of a black void. All around me I could hear strange animal-like cries and strange shapes running in the mist. I was trapped and alone and would stay that way until I woke up in the following morning. I spoke with my friend the next day and he only shrugged and told me not to worry about it. My days progressed normally through classes and lunchtime Pokemon battles. Sadly, each night the dreams continued to get even more vivid. One night I was actually freed from the cage, long enough to get attacked by some strange shadow creature. It left a grisly burn on my chest before I was locked in the cage again. The shadows around me continued to howl and laugh. I began to falter in school as I had been staying up as long as possible to hold off the dreams. I was tired all the time, but I did my best not to let my fatigue lower my grades too much. One Friday night, I came home and went straight to bed due to exhaustion. Almost as soon as my head hit the pillow, I was back in my usual prison. Except this time it was different to my previous visits. The mist seemed to have cleared a little, letting me see a dim outline of some sort of large room. I walked to the edge of the bars and peered through. I could make out a blurry reception-like counter and sitting area almost like a hospital lobby. As I stared, I was suddenly confronted by a massive floating shadow with glowing purple eyes. It spoke in a deep, dangerous tone. "After this long, do you not understand? Are we nothing more than tools to you?" It floated around the cage, and as it did, its exact shape began to come into more focus. I could make out a long neck with a pointed head, as well as several long wings on its back. It floated back to me and its eyes narrowed threateningly. "We wanted you to feel what it was like to be caged alone." It flapped its wings and the mist cleared from around its body, making me gasp. It was the Hydreigon I had used in the original White and Black 2. I had gone through great lengths to get this Pokémon, then stopped using it around when I found out about Pokégen. I knew it was a dream, but getting confronted by an angry Hydreigon was terrifying, reality or not. It snarled and flew closer as the mists around us cleared completely. Around us was every Pokémon I had sitting unused in my PC. They all stared at me from all angles, some in hatred, while others simply gave looks of sadness and betrayal. All of a sudden, I understood everything that had happened. The nightmares spent in the cage and the attack by the shadow monsters all made sense now. Being trapped in a lonely prison released just long enough to be beaten by others, then locked up again for not being good enough. I stared in shock at my Pokémon, who all stared back in silence when Hydreigon broke the silence. He snarled in anger. "So you finally get it, do you?" He slammed into the cage hard and screeched in rage. "You left us all alone, after all we did for you." It backed up, still snarling. "Those of us not strong enough you simply let die again and again." The Pokémon changing to a more somber expression, something conflicting inside him. "But we still loved you, for some damn reason." It backed up and kept floating backwards till it joined the throng of Pokémon in the background. "We will leave you for now to think about what you've done." And then the dream faded away. I woke in a sweat and looked around half expecting the dragon to swoop in and sever my head from my body, but I was safe for the moment. Later after breakfast, I went back downstairs to my room. I scooped up my DS and turned on Black 2. I went into the Pokémon Center and straight to the PC. I looked at all the Pokémon I didn't use anymore and I felt awful for them. There were at least 90 Pokémon I stopped using long before Pokégen came along. I guess the new Pokémon was the last straw. I looked at them all, and even though I told myself it was just a dream, a part of me felt different. I released all the Pokémon from my PC that weren't made through Pokégen and saved the game. A part of me felt silly having thrown away at least 3 years of work, but I was hoping that at least the Pokémon would go back to the wild. Maybe they'd get caught by a trainer who could actually train them properly. Over the next few days, I was back to school and the nightmares had finally stopped. I caught up on my sleep and my grades began to improve. I went back to playing with my friends, even though they were curious that all of a sudden, I didn't have even one box full. Life was finally getting back to normal when disaster struck again. That night, I settled in after spending a couple of hours working on Pokégen. For the first part of the night, my dreams were normal until I heard a deep voice. "Did you really think we would forgive?" All of a sudden, I was standing on the edge of a brick wall, looking at the ground 100 meters below. I teetered in danger of falling off when I finally caught my balance and looked around. The sky around me was dark, as if a massive storm stretched as far as I could see. I looked down and noticed what I was standing on. A gray brick platform stretching at least 50 meters across, while a small set of stairs stood in the middle, leading to an old iron bell. I was shocked that this was the top of the Celestial Tower in Black 2. The only difference was everything was rusted and stained while the sky was dark. A sudden shriek caught my attention and I looked up to see a massive shape swoop down from the sky. Hydreigon pulled up short of me at the last moment and hovered 3 meters from me. It was a threatening thing with soulless purple eyes and flashing teeth. It floated there a moment, then roared. "You think that we would simply forgive and forget your transgression?" Then it laughed in hatred. It snarled again. "I will personally make you pay for ever abandoning me." Then it flew straight at me, screeching all the way. It stretched out its neck and opened its jaws when I finally had the sense to dodge. The massive pulse of blue energy slammed into the bricks behind me and exploded, showering me in rubble. The beast turned in mid-flight and came around for another blast, its jaws already glowing when I heard it, a faint beating sound of wings. Seconds before Hydreigon could blast me into pieces, something massive smashed into him, knocking him to the ground. The Dragon Pulse escaped his jaws, hitting the ground, making another explosion, obscuring my vision. When the smoke cleared, I couldn't believe my eyes. Hydreigon was stuck in a crater, its throat in the clutches of Charizard. I was shocked and confused at the same time over how Charizard had gotten here and why he had come. The dragon was black as night with glowing red eyes full of fire. His claws seemed to glow the same shade too, while his tail flame shone like a raging forest ablaze. Charizard roared, his voice echoing into the darkness all around us before releasing Hydreigon. It backed up so it stood between me and Hydreigon before he spoke. "I understand why you hate him so much," he said in a deep tone like a rolling storm. "Yes, he left you alone for a time, but he let you go when you wished it." I stared in complete shock as Charizard continued. "You may not have realized it, but our trainer still loves you, even if you were not in use. He visited us all the time when we were in the storage system." Hydreigon snarled in fury. "You speak as if you know the feeling, but you were only left alone for a few days, while we were for months." Charizard issued a deep snarl and shook its head. He made the same mistake many others who visit this world make. But at least he became aware of it and left you all to live your own lives free. Hydreigon shook its tail in the air. "Silence, you fake! You don't have any right to speak the way you do. You're not a real Pokémon, only a cookie-cutter replica designed to fight. You lack a mind or soul of your own." Charizard was silent, then it shook its head. "No, you're wrong. I may not have come into the same way as you, that's for sure. But when Kyle created me, he poured his heart and soul into my body. He willed me into existence, and I will die before I let you harm him." Hydreigon screeched and reared back. "Enough! This ends now! I will kill you, then him." With that, it charged. Charizard spread its massive black wings and took to the air itself, and the two collided. Hydreigon lashed out with what had to be Dragon Rush, sending a sinister arc of energy death at Charizard. The black dragon countered with Hurricane, flapping its wings till the air around him swirled like a tornado. The blade of energy became lost in the twister, and Charizard emerged from the dark clouds again. Hydreigon roared in rage and charged up another Dragon Pulse, letting it fly. Charizard countered with a powerful flamethrower, the jets of flame engulfing the blue beam. Charizard flew forward and stretched out his arm, revealing glowing claws. He lashed out at the Dragon Claw, sending Hydreigon into the iron bell of the tower, cracking it in two. Hydreigon weakly rose from the rubble while Charizard slammed into the tower, cracking the stone floor. Hydreigon laughed. "You're strong, I will give you that." Charizard growled. "I will fight for the one who calls me his own." Hydreigon laughed before it rose to its feet again. "Too bad, for you are shackled by loyalty." It smirked, then fired another Dragon Pulse directly at me. Charizard flew in front and took the blow before disappearing in the following explosion. As the smoke cleared, I saw Charizard in the crater, breathing heavily, while Hydreigon advanced leisurely. It still astounds me that you will take this much punishment for a trainer you owe nothing to. Charizard rose from its knees and spread its wings before looking half back at me. He gave me a life, so it is only fitting I return it. With that, he roared again before his body became shrouded in fire. Fire Blitz was the most powerful move I had taught Charizard, only to be used in desperate situations. The burning dragon flew forward and slammed into Hydreigon. The ensuing explosion engulfed the two of them, sending rubble everywhere. Through the haze I could see Charizard kneeling weakly, taking in the dirty air, while Hydreigon laid on its side gasping. "You may have beaten me, but if I cannot take him, I will take you." With that, his whole body began to glow bright white, while the air was filled with a high-pitched whine. Too late did I realize what it was, and then the whole world turned white. The self-destruct nearly demolished the top of the tower, sending shockwaves into the night. I hadn't taught Hydreigon the move, but it seemed he learned it himself, just in case. As the smoke cleared, I saw what was left of the battlefield. The roof of the tower had been scorched black around the large crater. At its center laid Charizard. I rushed forward and knelt beside my friend and sighed. His injuries were great, far beyond repair. His wings had been burnt greatly, tearing huge holes into them. His whole body was burnt horrifically, revealing patches of charred muscle underneath his black skin. I began to curt as the dragon weakly turned his head to look at me. He smiled softly. "Do not weep for me, Kyle. I know you loved me deeply." He gave a deep cough and growled softly. "I'm sorry I couldn't have been a better friend." With that, the dragon shone a soft red and faded away, leaving me holding the open air, the fires burning around me. I howled in despair. I woke that morning exhausted, my eyes still red from crying all night. A part of me desperately wanted the whole thing to be a dream, but I knew better. I turned my DS on and checked my team. It was empty of any Pokémon, just like my PC. They had all left me, taking cue from the released Pokémon. Only Charizard had remained loyal to me, and he had died to defend me. Just like that, I was alone. All my Pokémon, my friends, were gone. I began to look on the game with a whole new light, rather than just it being a game. Pokémon wasn't just a game, but a whole world created by the imagination and will of us humans. A cartridge, like a window in which we stay in touch with the closest to us. But just like our world, past mistakes can haunt you forever. Later that day I was asked by my friend, the one who told me off in the first place, what had been troubling me all week. Hesitantly I told him everything. I thought he would laugh at me, but he shook his head sadly. "I'm sorry for your loss, Kyle. I tried to warn you, but I guess not everybody can deal with the truth like we can." For the days after I stopped playing Pokémon altogether, I was distant and miserable, thinking about how I lived in ignorance for so long, taking for granted the love of my Pokémon. Weeks went by and I still didn't feel any better. I don't know what made me do it, but I decided to play Black 2 again, just to see if some old memories would help me. I started off back in Aspertia, the starting town where I was reverted to. I tried talking to everyone, but they all just said the same stupid NPC lines to further my sadness and anger. I walked up to the Poké Center and tried the doors. To my surprise, they let me in. Before I had tried to enter the game, but the game had simply stated, "Cannot enter without Pokémon." As I walked inside, I tried talking to the nurse at the desk. At first, she didn't say anything, but eventually a text box appeared. "So you learned the truth the hard way." I was surprised but not shocked, as I was not blind to reality anymore. She continued on in another box. "Most would say you learned a hard life lesson, that's all, but I can see you are honestly sorry for everything that's happened." She continued on without me pressing A. "I'm glad that you at least know the truth. Maybe now you can see how your actions now affect this world." The game was still for a long minute. I thought it had frozen, but the nurse spoke again. "You should go to Celestial Tower. Your friend is waiting." I was shocked at what she said, and tried to start another conversation, but she only said the stock, "Would you like your Pokémon healed?" I left the building and headed north. The gate actually let me pass without trouble, saying, "Good luck, Kyle, and start anew." I cycled, until after a long wait I finally reached Celestial Tower. Slowly, I climbed the stairs inside until I got to the roof. It bore some resemblance to my dream, with the bell cracked and patches of missing tiles on the floor making navigation difficult. I finally got to the bell and stood in front of it. After a long pause, I hit A again. The game was silent for a long time when a text box appeared. "I'm happy you returned for me." After that, I heard a low Charizard cry. Then the game made a sound indicating you caught a Pokémon. I checked my menu and the Pokémon function was back. I opened it and there was my Charizard in the first slot. He appeared as normal as he did before the nightmares began, but his sprite seemed off. On closer examination, I found that his jaws were closed and formed into a smile. I smiled down at my most loyal friend and then saved the game, finally shutting off my DS. To this day, I still play Pokémon. I continue to dabble with the Pokegen program to fill out the other 5 slots of my team. But beyond my team of 6, I hadn't caught any others. I won't have any more Pokémon than I can care and love for anyways. I spread the message of the things I learned that fateful incident nearly a year ago to other players I meet in online battles, and throughout the internet. While some obviously think I'm crazy, others actually consider what I have said, and there are rare few I can show the light of things. Whether they believe or not is of no concern of mine. All I care about is living my life with my friends at my side. That was I Will Stand By You. Final thoughts? Mixed, but mostly very negative. I like this writer. I like this writer a lot. There were a lot of things in this story that I loved and a lot that I hated. The thing is that the things I loved were because the writer is very talented and put a lot of effort into the story, and the things I hated were because I've read so many stories with the same core idea. If the writer were to write a story with a very original core to it, I believe it could get as popular as one like Strangled Red, where people regard it as one of the best Pokemon creepypasta, and that's very high praise coming from me since I'm usually pretty harsh critic. Let me explain the negatives though. I am extremely sick at how so many of the Pokemon creepypasta I see pretty much have the same thing at their core. A story about Pokemon being neglected and coming back, and the main character learns the lesson to not abandon them or the character dies. It's literally been done thousands of times. Hell, this is what, the 32nd Pokemon creepypasta that I've read on the show? I bet that at least 12 of those 32 stories have the same core plot. That's just over a third of them. I've read plenty of stories with the same core plot that didn't even make it to the show because they were so bad without even being funny. This story did it in a decent new way, and the story was very well written, aside from me noticing quite a few typos and missing words, but that doesn't excuse it for being cliché at its core. I also noticed a problem that I don't think I've had to bring up on the show before. A part of the story is talking about dreams where the main character is dodging blasts of energy and Pokemon are fighting in really dramatic ways. I can't believe I need to explain this, but there's nothing creepy about an action scene, and that's all this is. Describing an action scene. The attention to detail in that section clearly shows that once again it's a very talented author who knows what he's doing in terms of writing a good story, but it's not creepy at all. And I think the author might have gotten caught up and lost track of that. Action scenes aren't creepy. In fact, any vivid dream where the author is talking to Pokemon isn't creepy either. If you're going to have the main character have nightmares, explain in brief if at all, and don't make it a major part of the plot unless the plot is totally based around it. It's just not creepy. On the same topic, Pokemon conversing with each other is also not creepy. This story also commits the very annoying trope of having the author explain the meaning of the events by saying it's the main character's realization. You do not need to do this. It's cliché, and it's treating the reader like an idiot. Let them come to their own conclusions. It's especially bad in a story like this, because the meaning behind the dreams were quite obvious as to what they were symbolizing. Really, the worst part of this entire story, aside from the overdone core, is that it's not creepy at all. It's just a story, not a creepypasta. That's why I really don't like this story. It's not a creepypasta, and it was submitted for a creepypasta show. Why did it still air? Because it gives me so much to talk about as to what does and doesn't work, so people writing their own stories can learn even more about what they should keep in mind when writing their stories, and show off that this author, although not writing the right kind of story, is still very talented. It's funny though, I was getting so frustrated and pissed off reading this story because of how good it could have been, that I honestly had to take breaks to try and relax. If my anger came through in my voice during the recording, I apologize, I was trying to suppress it. This is clearly a talented writer, and I would love to see more from Poképasta music. I hope that if we see another story from him, it's one with a more original core. That's it for this story. Tune in again next Saturday when we tackle yet another Pokémon creepypasta written by one of our own over at the creepypasta section of my forum with Soul Trapper. If you guys want to read these fan-made creepypasta on your own, or even make one yourself for the show, just follow the link to the forum in the description and join in. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, sweet dreams.